and this was in the first part of my lesson, but Nathan Witt is sick. And so Nathan Witt is supposed to be teaching class right now, and I was supposed to teach the second half, but he has COVID. Yeah, and so he asked me on Monday if I could teach, and so so I'm teaching tonight. It is not on respectable sins; it's on something else, but you'll have to wait to find out what it's on. I'm not telling you so you don't have a chance to go to another class. Yeah, exactly. And so next week, Nathan will be starting his series on respectable sins, and then after that, I'll teach. I'll finish up the quarter after Nathan. But a couple of announcements and prayer requests real quick. And well, talking about that, we do have new classes. It's a new quarter. This is a new Wednesday night. Chuck is teaching 2nd and 3rd John and Titus in there. We have Nathan and me are in here. And then Adam Gertson is all the way back at the end of B Hall in 215D. And it's called a refresh. And it's where they spend a while singing. And then they usually have a devotional at the end. But it's usually just a lot of singing. Sometimes it's new songs, learning songs, singing old songs, whatever you want to sing. And I've done that before, and that's a really good time too. So I think we got 3 solid options for sure. So announcements. Pat Ashley remains in CCU at Spring Hill Baptist. She will have a heart cath tomorrow to try and determine the cause of her heart issues. They've run several tests already. Pray for a good outcome and for her health to improve. Austin Binstead's mom, Carrie, will have surgery on December 8th to remove a tumor from one of her kidneys. Pray for a successful surgery and a complete recovery. Lisa Denton will have an MRI venogram on her brain this Friday. Pray it goes smoothly. Praying for you. Chris Miller will be having 2 procedures on the veins in her right leg on Thursday and Friday. The doctors are hoping to return her leg to full function. Pray these procedures will be effective as Chris has been in a great deal of pain. John Simpson was released from the hospital today. He is still weak. Pray for his health to improve. Any other prayer requests? Oh, no? None? No? Okay. Who is? Oh, Brandon is having back surgery? Okay. I did not know that. Where at, you know? Brandon Dodd's back surgery tomorrow, 8 a.m. What's that? Oh, okay. Thank you. Thanks for letting us know so we can be praying about that. All right, let's go ahead and have a prayer. Most gracious Heavenly Father, we come before you right now. We praise and honor and glorify you. We thank you for your Son. I pray, God, for this new quarter that has started, for all those who come on Wednesday night, after a long, hard day at work and so many things to do, God. I pray that the time that we spend this quarter studying your word can be a time of encouragement, be uplifting to one another, can be a time where we all draw closer to one another and draw closer to you. Right now we pray for Pat Ashley, Austin Binstead's mom, Carrie, Lisa Denton, Chris Miller, John Simpson, and Brendan Dodds. We lift all of these people up to you, and we place them before your throne. We pray that you'll take care of them. We thank you for your Son. It's in his name. Amen. So, like I said, next week Nathan will be in here, and he'll teach for a bit, and then I'll finish out the quarter. He's sick, so I'm starting us off this week, and this is kind of what I always call these standalone lessons, because this one's not going to be a part of a series, But back in October, we did Things We Don't Talk About in Church. And we could have done that series forever, I think. I mean, for a long time, because there's a lot of things we don't like to talk about in church, I think, for whatever reason, or we just don't talk about in church. And so I just wanted to, Chuck and I, when we were thinking about what to talk about in that series, we came up with a huge list, and we picked, 5 out, and those are the 5 we did. Well, here's one we didn't talk about that I wanted to talk about anyways, and that is war. What it isn't good for, absolutely. Anyways, that's what I always think of. Sorry, when I think of that. But war, this is something that Christians have been talking about for thousands of years. All the way back to the very beginning of the church, Christians have had talks and discussions and thoughts about war. But when's the last time you've heard a Bible class or a sermon talking about what Christians should think about war? I can't think of one. And so I thought, hey, let's talk about it, right? But just I wanted to show you a few quotes from early church fathers about war, just to show you, like, hey, this is something that's been talked about for 2,000 years. And I mean, it wasn't just the early church fathers, it was the later church fathers, and then even in the Middle Ages, a lot of theologians were talking about it then. So anyways, I can go on, but so here we go. So this is from Justin Martyr from 100 AD, to 165 is when he lived. Here's what he said, just 4 quotes really quick to start us off. We ourselves, this is the longest one. We ourselves were well conversant with war, murder, and everything evil, but all of us throughout the whole wide earth have traded in our weapons of war. We have exchanged our swords for plowshares, our spears for farm tools. Now we cultivate the fear of God, justice, kindness, faith, and the expectation of the future given us through the crucified one. The more we are persecuted and martyred, the more do others in ever-increasing numbers become believers. And let me say this, I have 2 more quotes and one from Scripture. And then I'm going to ask the question. I'm preparing you now. I want you to be thinking about it. What should Christians think about war? That's the question I'm going to ask you in a minute. What should Christians think about war? So be thinking about that as I read the next couple quotes. This is from Athanasius and Tertullian. Athanasius said, Christians, instead of arming themselves with swords, extend their hands in prayer. Tertullian said, the Christian does not hurt even his enemy. But then John the Baptist said this in Luke 3. He said, soldiers also asked, it actually says him, but it's John the Baptist. And what shall we do? And he said to them, do not extort money from anyone by threats or by false accusations, and be content with your wages. I mean, John the Baptist talked about it. Jesus talked about it. The early church fathers talked about it all throughout church history. It's just been a conversation that's been happening for a long time. So as Christians, and I really hope we have just some discussion tonight. I think it'll make the class a lot more interesting. But as Christians, do y'all have any thoughts or what should our thoughts be about war? Just anything? Just could be broad, general, whatever. I mean, it's good, bad, necessary, unnecessary, right, wrong, all of the above. What do y'all think? Yeah, hold on, let me come over here.
I don't remember which general it was. It might have been Patton that said, war is hell, but war is essential. Sometimes evil exists that has to be combated.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the simple fact of it.
Yeah, and there's a quote that I have in my lesson. It says something about the same thing, like, war is always bad. There's just some things that are worse. Right. I get it, for sure.
Do we not think our society today has turned to things violent that are really war among our nation? Like the shooting this afternoon shootings other places where they're just killing for no reason.
Yeah. Yeah, there are. There's
Way too much of it.
There's way too much of it. Killings for no reason sometimes. Yeah. Anything else? Any general thoughts about Christians and war? And yeah, Harold, hold on one second. Let me run over there. I'm coming. Sorry.
This quote is from Jesus. When you
He's a pretty good one to quote.
yeah. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come.
Yeah. Yeah.
It must happen. I mean, yeah, that's
Is that Matthew 24
this one is
or Mark 13?
Mark.
Yeah. Is it 13? Mark 13. Yeah, Mark 13. Yeah. Okay. Any others? Oh, Elizabeth. Okay, scream real loud. Blessed be the Lord, my God, my rock, who trains my hands for war, my fingers for battle. Psalm 144, verse 1. That's David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, very good. Very good. Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay, so so here I wanted to look at a few scriptures that talk about some general thoughts on war, and then we'll kind of dive into it and just see how far we get. My goal is I'll tell you what we're doing. I wanted to talk about what Scripture says about war and why it's necessary, and then talk about what about those things that, those scriptures that seem to say like killing is bad and love your enemies and turn the other cheek? What do we do with those type of scriptures? What's going on there, right? What about, pacifism and where these scriptures come from? So I want to talk about that a little bit. And then if we get past that, maybe we'll talk about what's called just war theory, like what makes a war an okay war. Because we know there's a lot of, like you said, Susan, right? A lot of times people are just killing people to kill people for no good reason. There can be some bad wars out there, right? But there's also some good wars, like you said, Gary, right? To stop evil, right? And so what does that look like? And that's called what's called just war theory. Yeah, Augustine. Yeah, exactly. And then after him, Aquinas, right? So in the Middle Ages. So talk about that maybe a little bit. So that's kind of where we're going. So let's look at Romans 13 is always the place to go, verses 1 through 4. It says this, and then we'll be in 1 Peter 2 after that. But it says this, it says, let every person be subject to governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Verse 3, for rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. In a second, I'm going to ask the question, what are some phrases in these passages that you can pick out that talk about how they're describing government and its job and what it does and things like that? So pick out a phrase or two that you can bring up here in a second. Here's the other one. In 1 Peter 2, verses 13 and 14, say this. Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme or to the governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. So I'll bring up the Romans 13 because it's a little bigger, but you can also look in your Bibles. Well, what are some phrases? Just shout them out. Some phrases that are used in these two passages that are talking about government and the role of government or the job of government or things like that. What are some phrases?
That it was instituted by God.
So, yeah, governments are instituted by God. What's something else? Oh, we're to be subject to the government. Yeah, what else? Oh, so the government is supposed to be our servant for our good, right? It's there to promote good, right? Is the idea, I think. What else?
Well, it's an interesting thing. He says he bears not the sword in vain in Romans 13.
Yeah.
Which indicates some form of physical.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, so it doesn't bear the sword in vain. And I will definitely obviously come back to that, right? What else? Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's an implication, right? For sure. Paying your taxes because it's instituted by God, right? And, I mean, it's there to promote. It's not a terror to good conduct, but to bad, right? So the government is there to be a terror to bad conduct. It's there to promote good conduct. What is one way that it is a terror to bad conduct? Well, Gary said it right in verse 4. It says the government does not wield the sword in vain. And so one of the things that government does is it's there to promote good conduct. It is there to what's the opposite of promote? To crush bad conduct. And one of the ways it does that is through a physical means, right? And so, I mean, usually when I think about this, I think, okay, there's some thief on the loose who's going around and night after night is breaking into people's houses. What is the government's job? To stop them, right? And then once they stop him, what is his job? To punish him. And what that does is hopefully he becomes an example for everybody else. Look what happens when you break into people's houses. And also it's to stop them from doing it. Or if you have a murderer or anybody else, this is the point of government. But at the same time, yes, Susan.
But sometimes God uses the bad government.
Oh, sure, of course.
Down on us to put us in our place and draw us toward Him.
Yeah, absolutely. God uses bad government to put us in our place and draw us towards Him.
That's the thing, because throughout the Old Testament, especially when you're reading Exodus, God says, I will use Pharaoh as my instrument.
Yeah,
Pharaoh will be my instrument
sure.
to prove my might and my authority.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah. So right, he used Nebuchadnezzar. He used King Cyrus of Persia, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Yeah, absolutely, good point. But in general, this is talking about punishing bad, promoting good. And what's true of a robber breaking into individual houses would also be true of thousands and thousands of robbers and thieves and murderers who are coming from another country to come to your country, right? I mean, this is the idea. If you have a whole army from another nation and they're robbers and thieves and murderers and they come to ransack and pillage, what the government should do with one thief should also do with a whole army of them. And this is kind of the point, right? I think this is where I think this is a good biblical basis for this idea of an army. And then just take it and make it really, really personal. Are you raising your hand or are you just okay? I'll make my point as I'm walking over. Just ask the question as Christians, if you saw a little kid being snatched up in a grocery store or at the park, what would be your job as a Christian, if you're physically able to do it, is to, by any means necessary, stop that person from snatching the kid. And personally, I think you would do it more than, hey, I'm sorry, could you please not do that? That would not be very nice. I think I hope I would have the courage to use any physical means necessary to stop that person from kidnapping that kid, and restraining that person. And it's going to be more than just like hugs and giggles, I mean, and if a Christian should do that with one person, if a whole army of bad people are coming, then maybe we should do the same thing. Yes, Harold.
I've always had some conflict with this passage because it was written during a time when the government was trying to destroy them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how do you obey that government when they're trying to destroy you?
Yeah.
the Christians?
Yeah, and isn't that really interesting? Sometimes we get all mad and upset and huffy puffy. Not my president, not the guy that I voted for. I'm not going to follow him. He's not promoting all of my agenda, so I don't think I have to obey him. I don't agree with what they're doing, so I'm not going to obey that. I'm not going to respect him. I'm not going to, right? If we think we have it bad with whatever politician is in whatever office, they had it a lot worse. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm just echoing what you're saying, right? I mean, they had a government that was much more antagonistic to Christians than our government now. And Paul still said that in Romans. Peter still said in first, I think it's right before 1 Peter 2, verses 13 through 14. Verse 12, I believe it says this. It says, it says, keep your... no, I guess it is... it says pray for those in power, right? So, yeah. So, anyways, so even in their culture, this is what they were called to do, even when they were antagonistic, right? I mean, that's a whole nother. What were we gonna say? Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, I've read stuff on this, and I don't want to get too far off topic because we are getting a tad off topic here. But so how do you resolve the conflict when you have governments that are really antagonistic to Christians, right? This would have been one, So Paul would have said, hey, still do it anyways. And the people I've read, what they would say is that, in general, there's some really bad governments where it may not be the case, but in general, having any government is better than no government. Even if it's a communist dictator, like Hitler would probably not be would be an example. I would say no, like we just need to be better probably to have no government. But I'm just saying, in general, it's better to have some government, even if we don't agree a lot with what they do, because it's better than just total chaos and anarchy reigning everywhere. Even governments that would be antagonistic towards Christians, they are bringing some law and order, as opposed to absolutely none and anarchy, right? So even really bad governments they're bringing, something is better than nothing sometimes. Although that's why it says pray for your government officials and, hopefully they'll make better decisions. And yeah, but that's a whole nother discussion. But yeah, so anyways. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Good point, Harold. So this is, I think, gives us maybe our. Oh, I'm sorry. In verse 4, Charlie, or? Okay, so it says, for he is God's servant for your good, but if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Verse 5. Therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this, you also pay taxes, for the authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing.
Ministers of God.
Yeah, ministers of God. Is that what you wanted me to read? Okay, do you want me to keep reading, or? Oh, okay. You're right. An avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. The servant of God to execute his wrath. Right. Yeah. Yep. There you go. Appreciate it. All right. So this is passages you would use to talk about the government and war and things like this. So here's the question: what about? I think I have it. You're right there. Oh, there's some. What about those scriptures that seem to be against killing? About those scriptures that talk about pacifism? Can you think of any verses that people would use to promote nonviolence? Turn the other cheek, right? From Matthew chapter 5. What other ones? Any other ones out there? Yes, Lisa? Yeah. Yeah. It's right, that's a good one. Vengeance is mine, I will praise as the Lord. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. That's verse 21, right? Yeah. Verse 18, if possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Absolutely. I'm going to live peaceably as I take this gun and I shoot you in the face, doesn't seem to, right?
As far as it depends on.
Yeah. Sure. We'll get into the scriptures here in a second, but what are some more, really quick? What's that? Oh, yeah, forgive people 70 times 7. That's another good one. Any others? Yes, Frank. Love thy neighbor. Love your enemy. I'm going to love you with this M16, like, what are we talking about here? Yeah, what else? Yeah, those who live by the sword die by the sword. That's what Jesus said. Them's red words right there. So let me just say, I'm not a pacifist, but I truly, deeply respect the pacifist tradition. There have been pacifists throughout church history, starting back at the earliest times of the church. Those first three I read, Martyr, Tertullian, and Athanasius, they were all pacifists. So were most church fathers. And I don't know if you know this, but the Church of Christ is part of the American Restoration Movement. Most of the American Restoration Movement people starting out were pacifists. James Harding, H. Leo Bowles. I actually have some written down. Let's see, where's it at? Oh, Talbot Fanning, Barton Stone, David Lipscomb, all pacifists. So I thought that was interesting. Pacifism has a long tradition in the Churches of Christ. And so I just say that to say, like, some people think, oh, pacifism, that's silliness. Well, they make some good points, I think. And I respect people who have strong enough convictions to be able to be pacifists. I'm not going to get into every single one of their arguments because we just don't have time, but just wanted to give a shout out to them. So I wanted to look at some of those verses really quick and try to explain some of those. So like Chuck talked about this when he talked about a capital punishment in our series in October, but one would be like Exodus 20 and verse 13, you shall not murder. That would be like, hey, let's not murder, right? However, he pointed out that the Hebrew word there is rasach, which refers to the unlawful taking of another human life. That word was never used to talk about taking human life in war, right? This was the unlawful or unethical taking of human life. It's talking about murder, not killing someone else, right? So that's how you would explain that. What about Matthew 5, verses 38 through 42? It says, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse one who would borrow from you. So what do we do with, I thought it was, what do we do with a verse like that? Do not resist the one who is evil. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. Yes, Bill. I want us to wrestle with it for just a half a second, so don't give us the right answer. And I'm just kidding, go for it. Let me come over so you can have the mic. Yeah.
These are instructions for individuals, not for governments. And when we confuse the two, we get messed up.
Yeah. I think there's 2 ways to explain this passage, and I think that's one of them. There's verses that talk about personal responsibility and public responsibility, and those are different. If and I have it written down, but the idea is like, if someone wants to slap me, then I'll just let them slap me, and I can just take it, right? And I'll just turn the other cheek and slap me again. That's fine. But if someone slaps my daughter, and I'm in custody over her, and it is my job to protect her, I do not just pick her up and go, okay, now get the other side while you're at it, right? It's your responsibility as a custodian or as a parent to step in and to keep that from happening. That's the difference between a personal responsibility and a public or custodial, responsibility. And sometimes we confuse the two. And so the government is in a custodial responsibility. What's done in a private matter is not necessarily what you should do in public sphere. Yeah, we're going to say something else?
I think turn the other cheek is a figure of speech. It's not that I actually turn the other cheek and say, okay, hit this side.
Right.
The idea is don't retaliate.
Yes. And this really brings up my other point, and this is something we don't even talk about. So my 2 points were, one, I think we have a misapplication, and we just talked about the misapplication, personal and public responsibility. But also, I don't even think we quite understand what's going on here. So I'm just going to call you out. Darren, can I use you as an example really quick? Sure. Okay, stand up really quick. Stand like right here so everybody can see you. Okay, so let's see. This is his right cheek, right here, right? Now, if you're going to slap somebody or you're going to hit somebody, which hand are you going to probably do it with? Your right hand, unless you're a southpaw and your left hand. But, most people, well, especially in that culture, everybody used the right hand. Did you know in Latin, which they all spoke Latin back then, left, the word for left was sinister. I mean, that's what they thought of the left. It was not good. So they would have used the right hand. But it says they hit them on the right cheek. How am I going to do that? Well, the way you do it is you go, wah, and then you come around, and then, right? Like, there's so the only way to hit them on the right cheek is, mostly when you punch, you're going to do it like that. But that's not the right. What side is that? That's the left. And so you would have to use a backhand to hit them on the right cheek. And the idea was that it wasn't about physical retaliation, it was an insult. You know, you see like in movies where they take off their glove and like slap them with their glove. They don't slap them with the glove as an actual like physical assault. It's more of like a public humiliation. You can actually sit down, I appreciate it. But that's and so, yeah, so most people think that's actually what's going on in that passage. It's actually not talking about a physical assault. It's talking about when someone publicly humiliates you and takes them and they backhand them. You backhand someone, this is not like you're trying to actually hurt them. Most of the time, it's a way to publicly humiliate someone. And it's saying in those instances, when someone's trying to publicly humiliate you, then don't retaliate, right? And so I've heard that being spoken of as the understanding behind this passage. And to me, that makes sense. And I think culturally, that's how they would have understood that passage. It doesn't say if someone starts beating you up, just go, okay, just, maul me, that's fine. I don't think that's what was going on in that passage. Oh, yeah, so when talking about your first point, Bill, I called them public and private duties, personal duties, and duties of state, right? And that's what you were referring to, and the people who I read agreed with you. So, and that's what they said too. So what about the command to love your neighbor as yourself? Should this command keep us from war? And like I said, I'm going to love you with my M16, right? All right, I love you on those bullets as they, go fly. Like, what do we do with that? What do we do with, that's Matthew 22, verse 39, I believe, right? What's the greatest command? Love the Lord your God, and then also love your neighbor as yourself. So what do we do with a passage like that?
I think we first have to understand what love really means.
Sure.
In our culture, it's kind of not well understood.
Well, I mean,
Kind of this general idea that if you have to make the other person happy with whatever you do, has to be something that pleases that other person, and that's not always the case. Very often, it isn't the case. You mentioned World War II a little bit ago. Was it loving towards all the victims that were being murdered, civilians, for the United States to sit on the sideline and just let Germany do its thing, or Japan, or Italy? Probably not. To love them was to spill our blood and treasure and put a stop to it. Maybe that's an oversimplification, but
yeah. No, that's, yeah. Yeah, sometimes loving your neighbor means protecting them from someone who wants to harm them.
Especially when they can't protect themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also, Jesus, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think he just made up that command to love your neighbor as yourself.
No, that come out of Leviticus.
Yeah, it came out of like Leviticus 19 and verse 18, right? He was quoting Leviticus 19, and I believe verse 18. And didn't God command in the Old Testament war?
Very much so.
So, I mean, that was the Canaanites, and
Rights.
yeah, right? And so, apparently, sometimes we use a verse like this saying you're not allowed to go to war or kill anyone ever. I'm just saying, God did not see a problem with commanding war for the Israelites and at the exact same time commanding the Israelites to love their neighbor. He did not see a conflict between the two. And I think that probably goes back to a lot of what you were talking about, Paul, right? What does it mean to love? And sometimes loving is protecting the vulnerable and the people who can't protect themselves and things like that. So I think you have some of that going on. Okay, let's see. Where am I at? Okay. So let me ask this question. There's more, but those were some of the passages that would talk about nonviolence, and we kind of talked about some of those. And I really want to get into this. This is the just war theory that we were talking about. Let me ask this. Nope. What are some conditions that should be met to go to war? And what I mean by this is if there's a spectrum laid out in front of you, on one end of the spectrum is pacifism. That would say Christians should never fight, never use any physical force ever for any reason. On the other end of the spectrum would be this like just extreme militarianism, where you have like crusades and just, just fighting for not good reasons, right? So what would be good reasons to go to war? What conditions should be met to say that this war is a good war, as opposed to the bad ones that even you mentioned, Susan? If you're attacked without provocation, that's a good one. That's good. I'm glad that at least y'all understand my question. I was hoping I was phrasing it correctly. Yeah. What's that? Oh, if there's a threat to your freedom. Yeah. Oh, when all other solutions have been exhausted. Man, y'all are like nailing what I was at least thinking. I didn't know. Sometimes you ask questions like, I don't know if they'll even understand my question. And y'all, I think y'all are getting it. Yeah. Any others?
It's when somebody can't protect themselves.
Okay, when you're defending someone else, when someone else can't protect themselves.
Yeah.
That's very good. Absolutely. Any others? Oh. Yeah, so not unwisely when you've asked many advisors. Ah, that's good. That's good. And that might even go to Todd's point also about when you've exhausted every other solution, and maybe it's not one person making the shots. You're really trying to. Yeah. Any others? Okay, so as Gary mentioned earlier, this is called the just war theory. And the idea is that some wars can just be bad. They're just bad, evil wars. But some wars can be just. They can be good. They can be okay, I guess. Maybe not good because all wars are bad, but they can be justified. Is the word I was looking for. And like you said, this goes all the way back to Augustine, back in like the 300s, and then Aquinas talked about it, I think, in like the 1500s. But anyway, so here's the 8 different things they needed to have a just war. And I'll just run through them. A just cause is the reason for going to war morally right, such as a defense of a nation, or it is an evil cause, such as a revenge or a conquest. And let me just say that, with all of 8 of these, sometimes you can look at a situation and when a nation is going to war and go, it can be really clear cut. And you go, oh, that's absolutely just, or that's absolutely unjust. And then sometimes, and maybe even a lot of times, it's going to be very gray, and it's going to be really hard, because I think war is messy. But we'll get to some of the other ones. Second one is competent authority. And that kind of reminded me what you talked about, Dwayne, is the idea is that it's not just one rogue general declaring war for an entire nation. Is that the people in authority are the ones who are calling the shots. And that kind of reminded me, it's like a group of advisors. It's not just one random guy, but they all get together and it's a consensus. This is what we need to do, right? Comparative justice. Is it clear that the actions of the enemy are morally wrong and the motives and actions of one's own nation are morally right? And these can be really tough, right? Because, of course, you always want to think the other person's bad and we're good, and the other person's wrong and we're always right, and we always want to justify ourselves. But these are the questions you have to ask to go into. do you have the right intention? Is the purpose of going to war to protect justice and righteousness rather than rob and pillage and destroy another nation? Is it possible that sometimes some nations go to war not to promote righteousness and justice, but to promote maybe their economic concerns? And they're doing it to protect their economic interests. Is that having a morally justified, is that a morally, protecting your economic concerns, is that a morally justifiable reason where you're promoting righteousness and justice? That's a question you have to ask, right? Is it the last resort? I think that's what you said, Todd, right? Has every other reasonable means of resolving the issue been talked about? Probability of success. Going into it, is there any probability that you'll be actually able to win this war? And I think the idea behind it is you're not just marching your troops off to death for no reason at all. You're going to cause all kinds of death and carnage, and you have no hope of this having any effect on anything, right? That's the idea behind that. Proportionality of projected results. Will the good results that come from a victory in a war be significantly greater than the harm and loss that will inevitably come from pursuing the war? And I thought that was really interesting. And that's the idea of saying, okay, we're gonna fight, we're gonna go into war, we're gonna try to do this, and if we win the war, if we get what we want, is what we get, is that going to be of greater value than all of the lives lost, all of the carnage, all of the, just the horribleness of the war? And you weigh them out. Sometimes you can go in with a just cause and you can win the war and you have the right intention, but you're going to, you might have just tons of loss and bloodshed and carnage, and you only get very, very minimal gains, and you go, well, it's not worth it. We win, but it's just not worth what it costs, right? So proportionality of projected results, and do you have the right spirit? Which means can you conduct yourself in such a way to where is it ever possible for you and that other nation to be able to come together again? Will they always think of you as horrible, wicked, evil people? Or will you ever be able to, the way I said it was, the war is undertaken with great reluctance and sorrow at the harm that will come, rather than simply with a delight in war. I guess I don't even have it there. But also, can you come together and ever come back as two nations and work together? So I had some more stuff, but those were the 8 items for just war. Not that you have to remember them all, but I just wanted to expose us to some of those, because I bet most of us had not heard of most of this kind of stuff before. As citizens of a nation, it's important to have, at least have this in your mind rolling around as you're thinking about public policy and what's going on in the world. Yes.
As citizens of this country,
right.
Has this country ever been involved in a war that was not just?
And Kevin asked, has this country ever been involved in a war that was not just?
Tomorrow is, yeah.
And I will let Nathan Witt answer that question next week. Yes, Elizabeth.
I hope that no Christian ever wants to go to war just to go.
Right.
But I hope if the need is there, that one really would be willing. I think about Nehemiah chapter 4, when the Jews that had escaped captivity from exile, when they attempted to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, the enemy was constantly at their backs. They prayed to God, sought his counsel and his advice,
All right. Any other comments before we? Yes, Todd.
I was just thinking that within this theory, those 8 factors basically become the building blocks for what are going to be the joys of engagement.
Yes. Yes, they, and that's actually the next slide, right there. There should be moral restrictions, right? So yeah. So then you take that just war and you take it the next step, which is there's a proper means of engagement in that war. You should use proportionality, only use as much force as you need to, discrimination between combatants and non-combatants, try not to use evil means, right? This is like Geneva Convention type stuff. I mean, don't use things that are right, and then good faith, which goes back to that the last one, talking about hopefully as nations you can come back together. So yeah, for sure, absolutely.
Can I leave us with a question?
Leave us. Okay, the last comment is a question. That's always a good way to end on. What, Dwayne?
To say something about what Kevin said, everybody in here needs to Google false flag. What a false flag is.
False flag. Okay, last question.
What do you do with an enemy that doesn't respect our rules of engagement?
Yeah. Well, there you go. Good one to end on.